So the taxi strike in Cape Town is over, and a taxi task team is deciding on the matter of thousands of impounded taxis. But over the weekend, another 14 minibus taxis were impounded by the city. This morning, Santaco, the SA National Taxi Council, said it would be filing another court interdict against further impoundments. Well, I'm joined now by Phala, National Spokesperson for Santaco. Rebecca, thank you so much for joining us. So have you filed that interdict?
Good evening, Sally, and to the viewers. The finalization of that interdict has been a subject of a discussion or a meeting that's been taking place for the larger part of today between particularly our leaders, but obviously other stakeholders. And so at this point, we cannot as yet say that it has fully been launched. However, we can still confirm that it is in action that we will be taking on our end.
All right. When you say you're having a meeting that is still underway with stakeholders, does that include officials from the city, even the province?
It doesn't. It's largely stakeholders from our end, inclusive of concerned parties, which would also include community members. We're having a variety of these meetings, so you would have some that are at a high level, which are looking at the interdict, but you would also have some by other leaders who are also just looking at the reality of the matter on the ground to say, like you've said in the introduction, are they still continuing with impoundments, and what is it that we can do in the interim also, because you would have also heard some people speculating that we could most likely go back to withdrawing our vehicles. So it's just been a day of a lot of interactions and a lot of engagements for ourselves as an industry.
All right. No, I understand. So,
yeah.
And I also understand that the meeting is still underway. But the City of Cape Town says that the weekend impoundments were done in accordance with the agreement that you signed with them. In other words, they impounded vehicles that didn't have a valid operating license or were on the wrong route or no public driving permit or perhaps not roadworthy. Do you have a problem with those impoundments over the weekend?
I wouldn't necessarily, for starters, know the very specifics of all the vehicles that were impounded over the weekend, Sally, but I think we can also clarify that we've been agreeing in principle, even before that agreement was really just put to a finalization, that we're not opposed to the idea of the implementation of the law with regards to the basics of what is expected of every person that's driving a vehicle, inclusive of adhering to the traffic rules and really ensuring that your vehicle is safe to be on the road. You would remember the greatest concern that we were having was the issue of vehicles being impounded for a fault that's largely on the side of the driver. But for the city to obviously say that in the 14 days period that we had agreed upon is not necessarily something we would want to then have a back and forth with publicly, considering that interdict that we're filing now, so that we really also just make sure that legally we don't then start compromising ourselves in our position when it eventually then goes before court.
All right. So you said a lot there. Let me try and unpack what you're saying. You're saying there's no problem with the law, and as the law stands, they do, that Land Transport Act does lay out where you can impound a vehicle that transports the public. Does that mean that you have no problem with the impoundments over the weekend if they were done in accordance with the law?
That's exactly what we're saying, Sally. But one other issue that then has come into the fore is one issue that actually necessitated that task team. We were now registering the reality of the matter to say, as an industry, we've got many factors which often lead to the reckless driving, which obviously is an issue of concern that has been observed, but obviously also the state of vehicles, the issue of the financing model for our industry is widely known. And so in as much as we're making a commitment to saying we don't have a problem with the application of the law, we want for government, be it at a municipal level or at the national level, to also understand some of these material conditions and sort of find a way to meet it halfway, if you will.
I see. Okay. What are you seeking with this interdict, which, from what you said a little earlier, you're currently discussing?
So, So we're discussing a number of things at the center of which is obviously what we are going to be doing, seeking a lot of advice legally, because as you would have obviously noticed, this is still really persisting with the impoundments, but also some things have also publicly been said, suggesting that what we agreed upon is something that had been communicated prior. So there are a lot of things that are being said publicly, and then there are a lot of things that are being said in some of the meetings that we're having. So it's some form of an introspectory meeting that we're also having to say exactly what are we reading into that which we get to discuss in these meetings and what then gets to be translated publicly. I think that's one of the reasons why we're re-emphasizing now that the biggest thing for us is to let the courts then adjudicate, because issues of, you would remember the sentiments shared even by the minister, which has caused this other debate now about the application of national legislation in comparison to bylaws from a municipal perspective. And so that's why we want so to be safely to really allow the courts to adjudicate, because obviously you would also know that in as much as it's the Western Cape, it's not that there aren't concerns elsewhere in the country regarding impoundments and the material conditions which lead to these impoundments. So we're doing a lot of, looking within. That's why you're even having a discussion with me from a national perspective, because it's becoming a concern of ours holistically.
All right. So let me ask you a couple of direct questions, because this is the place where we like to set the record straight. So is there at this point any chance that Santaco is going to declare another stay away in Cape Town?
We can't confirm that. Look, Sally, but even if there were to be such, you'd remember we've made a promise even to community members and government that there will be a notice period, because we understand how unfortunate it is, especially for commuters who rely on our service, if we just decide now to say we're withdrawing everything. So we can't as yet confirm, considering also the nature of how these situations have been changing quite drastically, but the commitment that we've made, especially to our commuters, to say we will give them enough time to prepare, that we can stand by.
Yeah, so that would be a 36 hours notice, and you'd let the Premier and the Mayor know. What is the core of the unhappiness? Because clearly, you didn't. I expected you to say absolutely not, Sally. There's no further stay away on the cards, and you weren't able to be that emphatic. So I'm guessing then there's issues that are still niggling. In a nutshell, what are they?
Look, Sally, at the very bottom is obviously that issue of what we're re-emphasizing, to say the material conditions that we're facing as a transport of a lot of South Africans, is the reality of how some of these socio-economic challenges often hinder efforts to try and ensure that our vehicles are always up to par. But at the very center also is that let impoundments, when a driver is found to have erred, let it be clear what is fined and what then leads to an impoundment, because in a number of instances, and one of the things that we're doing now, by the way, is also the consolidation of those cases where we've found that vehicles were impounded when a fault was on the driver. Those are some of the issues that we're really dealing with now. So those are the major contentions, and even with what happened this past weekend, that's why we were still not so happy.
And Rebecca, am I correct that it is just what's been happening in Cape Town and not any impoundments that has happened of your vehicles in other centres?
Sorry, Sally, I missed that.
Am I correct that it is just the impoundments and the way they've been carried out in Cape Town that's at the root of the problem? Or are you actually taking a look at impoundments in other centres and raising concerns there as well?
Look, it's obviously central to everything is Cape Town, especially considering the rate at which they did this. This is why we even went as far as withdrawing vehicles, because it was at an alarming rate. But we have, obviously, on a continuous basis, foot soldiers who will alert us of some of these instances. Nothing compares to the rate at which things are happening in Cape Town, but we can't then also say that it's not happening elsewhere. It's just not at that heightened rate.
Okay. And then another very clear question that I'd like a clear answer is, did Santaco or any member of the leadership of Santaco tell drivers in Cape Town, taxi drivers, that there would be no more impoundments after this deal was signed?
You're saying we did what?
Did anyone from Santaco lead your drivers to believe that the impoundments would not happen anymore?
I don't necessarily think so. The conditions of the agreement, when it was agreed upon, leading to us then suspending the stay-away, were very clear that drivers will still be expected to act in accordance with the rules of the road. Because remember, our thing is it's always been a continued communication internally to our drivers to say, do that which you're expected to do as a licensed driver. And so it hasn't necessarily changed to say we at some point suggested that there would not be any impoundments. But the understanding obviously is that we're hoping that through the interventions of the laws with clarity there as well, that some of those material conditions that I've spoken to you about can be considered. So nothing definite to that extent has ever been communicated, Sally.
All right. Well, thank you so much for speaking to us this evening. That is Rebecca Phala, national spokesperson of Santaco, making it clear that they have no problem with the ongoing impoundment of vehicles as long as it's in compliance with the National Land Transport Act, but also confirming that stakeholders within Santaco and their affiliates are actually currently in a meeting. They are discussing whether to seek an interdict around this issue of impoundments. And it's not 100% clear, and I think that's partly because the meeting's still underway. She also wouldn't confirm whether another stay-away was on the cards or not. But she did say that according to the